Says that I'm live. Hi, guys. I hope you can hear me. I think you can see me. Let me know if you can hear me. I turned down my mic sensitivity a little bit. Hopefully that gets rid of that static annoyance. Thank you. So, as tradition, this is Pink Tom Ford, whatever that means. I'm not sure what's up with that static thing. I noticed it listened back to another one. It doesn't do it on any other program on my computer, but for whatever reason with YouTube it does, and I'm not sure why it does. So hopefully you guys can put up with it anyways, and it's not too bad. There should be music in the background. YouTube needs to add that. It seems that when I play it, I get copyright infringement notices. That's okay because I don't monetize this channel. It does not matter. I thought it was my beard too. That's why I switched to microphones originally. The iPhone one kind of hangs like right about here. Gets caught up in hair. But yeah. So what I did for today was I started going through emails and messages and stuff looking for questions. Got a bunch of them, threw them into like a Word document. And I was thinking about kind of answering them one by one, but then I realized that a lot of them kind of covered the same topics and whatnot. So I kind of broke them down into categories and thought that I would still answer them that way. And then I realized that it might just be easier for me to kind of talk on each one of those categories and answer the questions that way. That way I don't make anyone feel bad if I didn't answer your question directly, and don't make anyone feel good if I did. I'm kidding. So, been an interesting week. I'm a little hairier, a little scruffier. Not much I can do. They won't let anyone come over and cut my hair. And I'm not going to do it myself because my hands are messed up from being broken a bunch of times. The reason that happened is because I used to do a lot of fighting, martial arts and stuff. And when you punch things too hard, your hands break. It's not really a cool thing. They said the vaccine will be ready in June. Oh, that's exciting. Can't wait to line up for that. Fuck. Send it to me now. Why do I have to wait? I'm kidding, in case that's not clear. Yeah. So I think I'll start with something I wrote a blog about. I can't remember if it was the Ruiner blog or the Whole World Laughing blog, but I know I wrote a blog about it at some point about upbringing and upbringing planets, and the idea that there's lots of different planets out there, and some of them get used for different things. Some of them get used to raise different forms of plant, different forms of life in that way. Some of them get, different types of animals. And then ones like ours are meant to be a kind of a dual evolution planet. So there's always at least two kind of species evolving on this planet at any given time. One of them is a natural evolution for the planet, which is where natural evolution comes in. And then the other one would be what we call like an accelerated evolutionary plan, which would, talk to people like us. So this particular planet has been used for that for as long as I'm aware of. They say it's about 14 billion years old. It's probably older than that. And it's been used for several millions of years to raise various races, if you will. The Draco are one of them. They had their upbringing on this planet long time ago. And so that's why they were familiar with it, part of why they had a bit of an affinity to it, and has a lot to do with why they turned out the way that they did, because their upbringing was not a pleasant one. Yeah, so that'll be something that kind of keep in mind through everything else, is that on an upbringing planet, part of the point of having that is to give upcoming species a kind of learning ground. People often refer to Earth as a school. That's not entirely incorrect. But when a new species is created on a planet, there's like an influx of new souls that come from Source. Those new souls become whatever those are, in our case, human. And part of their evolution is attached to the physical evolution of the vehicle that they incarnated into. And the situation that species race has to live through. So ours is pretty obvious. Unfortunate, but obvious. And on a lot of upbringing planets, there is a lot of chaos. If you want to make things grow, you need a little bit of chaos. If you want things to move and progress, then you need to, have imbalances between light and dark happen. And this planet has a lot of that because we need it to keep us moving forward. There's a certain amount of lessons that you learn through learning to fight off darkness and learning to connect to nature and learning to create a natural balance or equilibrium with your environment. Our version of humans never really got the chance to do that because we were created with a purpose that was outside of that, which was kind of a violation by the Draco, if you will. And because of that, we've always had someone meddling with us, and we've never had the opportunity to be what we would naturally be. And that's a very big problem. And I'll get back to that problem later in some other questions, but if what we should have had was just kind of been left to our own devices, very little guidance, and allowed to just explore our natural connection with our bodies and our planet. And we didn't get the chance to do that. So here we are today. That kind of will lead me into the next set of things I want to talk about, which are, myths and religions and things like that. The only one that I've ever really studied, the only mythos set that I ever really studied personally, was the Norse mythology. And that was just because I found it interesting, the themes in it. At a very young age, I learned how these mythologies were created and used, and so I kind of didn't pay too much attention to anything that I wasn't interested in outside of that when it came to that topic. But what myths are long periods of history condensed into a story, an allegory. And that's why when I was talking about names of the different gods and whatnot being titles, that is true, because even though there may have been one person with that name who performed actions under that name, it was usually a kind of a group of people surrounding that person who performed a set of actions that affected history in such a way. Now, if you're going to condense things down, you're going to take all of those different characters and break them down into one. If you've watched Lord of the Rings, or specifically the Hobbit series, there's characters in the movie that aren't necessarily in the book, but you'll notice that they kind of encompass a bunch of characters that are in the book that aren't in the movie. And that's a good example of how that works, is you can take all the main themes of all these different characters and all these different personality types that mean something and matter, and you can condense them down into one and still have that be a pretty solid character. So in a lot of mythos, there's a lot of names and characters and gods that are exactly that. They're a compilation of a bunch of different beings, people. It is true that for the most part, gods represent ETs. Like, they don't represent, man in the cloud type gods. They are beings from other planets with highly advanced understanding to our own. And with the different myth sets that exist within our learning, from the Greeks to Indian and everything else. It's different periods of time, different cultures during different periods of time doing exactly that, taking all of that information that happened over these long periods of history and cramming them down into one story that works as an allegory, a set of lessons and archetypes and things that you can learn from that not only tell the story of what happened, but also encapsulate all the lessons that got learned by all of those people and all of the beings involved during those periods of time. And so they're valuable to read with that in mind. If you're trying to, link, Zeus is so and so, this is that, then you might get really confused. But if you take each story as just being its own, imagine the world just existing within that story, then you can learn a lot from them. Most of the ones that we have, or all of the ones that we have, or I guess all of them, they get rewritten as well. So let's say that the period of time that particular mythos actually represented, ended, some time passed, that story got retold to a new generation of beings on Earth and written down again. The telephone effect will happen, and there will be some retelling of the story just to make it fit that new understanding, or the understanding of the people that they're teaching it to. And so the myths have been kind of twisted or retold. I shouldn't say twisted because that's not really a malicious thing to do. Retold in that way and changed over time. And then the Draco came along, and they have this control system that they want to implement, so they had to go back and rewrite all of those as well in order to put in certain themes, which come all the way back to, the Sumerian mythos, or the Anunnaki story and Anu and his two boys, which really does get reflected in a lot of the other myths, right? In Christianity, there's God, and then Adam and Eve could be pictured as that, or even Cain and Abel later on, but there's always that kind of diffusion of, you've got the one God and then his children, if you will, who kind of do more running the show and get punished by him whenever they fuck up. So there's some common themes. They're not exact themes, just some commonalities between them all. So that's the purpose of them, and that's where they all came from. And I'm not the person to help you break down each character and what that all means in every mythos. Our modern day one is Lord of the Rings. It's exactly what it is. It's what Tolkien was meant to do in writing it. I don't know if I've ever told the story. My understanding of it was that he was allowed a bunch of information, a bunch of real books from the time of Lemuria that talked about history prior to Lemuria. And that is all before Atlantis even, so you're talking about very old books that were written in a language that very much represents his Elvish. And he took all of that and he wrote his own allegory set, his own mythos, based on that period of history in such a way that he believed it was relevant to us today. He was also aware of Draco and Anu and what had happened there, and that is also infused into it quite cleverly. And the way he got away with it was by writing Lord of the Rings and Silmarillion and all that backstory, but then also writing The Hobbit and releasing The Hobbit. And of course, he's going to release more books. We just put it a children's book. It's not a big deal. He's talking about some of the stuff he learned, but he's not telling anybody anything. But then Lord of the Rings hit, and bam, there you go. You've got a brand new mythos that is more positively aligned for the people of this time in this world. Pissed a lot of people off, but it still managed to do what it's done. And it's true through all of history. No matter how much control the Draco ever wanted, they were never able to control everything. And things slipped through, and they had to adjust afterwards. And so we do have gems buried in everything. And therefore, it's good to consume as much of it as you can, educate yourself on it as much as you can. Just if you're trying to paint together a direct picture out of it all, it might not work for you. It might drive you a little bit crazy. So that kind of sums that up, I think. We talk about incarnation a little bit. I guess I said it earlier about, or have said it before as well, leaving source, incarnating into bodies. Once those bodies die, you usually, whatever planet you're on, you hit their wheel of carnation, wheel of incarnation. From there, you make choices about what you want to do next. You made choices within source. You make choices there. My point is that we make choices. Um, we don't understand those choices from this level of thinking at all. And, there's probably many things that have happened to us along the way that we would, while we're going through them, go, no, this is not what I agreed to. I would not have signed up for this. There's no fucking way I would have wanted that. But for the most part, that's not true. There are violations to this. We've discussed, obviously, certain types of technologies and certain people abusing types of powers, but in a natural sense, that's not the case. And even when it comes to, bad situations like we're in, a lot of us knew exactly what we were getting into before we got into it. I've talked kind of a little bit without going into too much detail about how I hold my own memories from prior to being Shane. And I know that everything Shane has gone through, as dark as it has been, is something that I did choose to go through because it's a set of experiences my soul has wanted, is a set of education about planet Earth and being human that I have wanted to acquire. And in order to acquire the right data set, I had to have certain experiences. And I trusted myself to be able to survive them. And yeah. The idea of free will and choice doesn't apply to us at this physical level. It does to some extent with choice, but free will, obviously there's violations of our free will all over the place, things that we can't control, things that we can't avoid, things that just, don't seem like we have a choice for. But at levels above the physical reality, free will does exist and things do play out by choice. And this physical reality is being created by those choices, not by choices here. It's a combination of making a choice above the reaction here and then seeing that play out. So that was going to segue me into talking about ETs and something that I brought up in the last one about the genetics we share with lots of different ETs. Through genetic memory, because we share genetics with them, we have certain things come into our consciousness that is attached to genetic memory or the memory of that particular species that lead us towards certain things in our life and lead us to feel certain ways. There are way too many species and races out there to even properly list for anybody. This is what they're like, this is what they wear, this is what they do, and there's so much variable. Just like, I didn't wear the same shirt yesterday. I don't know why we assume that they wear the same thing all the time. And even things like, I could say Pleiadians, I could say two different groups of Pleiadians that I'm very well aware of and had interactions with personally, have interacted with this planet. One are very warlike, and you probably wouldn't like them very much, most of you. The other one are not. They're the complete opposite of that. So that generalization that we do gets us into trouble, and not understanding the incredible diversity leads us to ask questions that we're not going to be able to answer. We have connections to these races because of soul memory a lot of the time. A lot of the time, if you really identify with, ETX, YZ, that's because maybe you spent a lifetime with them, or your soul has some type of memory of interacting with them. One of my good friends, Alex, who is an ET, I have been interacting with her for countless amount of years, long before I ever came to planet Earth. So, my interactions with her here have just been an ongoing saga and a relationship that we've had for a very long time. And that's probably true for a lot of people listening right now. You probably have those, and you're separated because of your incarnation right now. And that happens. And it's something when you're outside of your body, you totally understand just happens. When we're not in our body, and just from our soul point of view, like 1 year, 10 years, a million years is very different than it seems from our human imagination. Being away from someone you love for a few days as a human can hurt really bad sometimes. But from a soul level, you can be away from people that you love for millions of years and not feel that same type of pain. It's not registered the same way. Totally different understanding. So trying to understand sometimes why souls, at a soul level, things can excuse what's going on at the physical level is very difficult, because we don't have that clarity all the time of the way we think about things and all the data that we have to make our decisions and base our feelings off of, when we're outside of these bodies. So, yeah. Contact with them typically comes from those connections that we've formed outside of here. There's not a lot of open contact with planet Earth because there shouldn't be. This is an upbringing planet. Humans are supposed to figure shit out for themselves. They're not supposed to have constant interaction with ETs until they've created a balance. That's somewhere where we went wrong very early in our development. Until we've maintained or created that equilibrium and learned to maintain it, that's when we should start getting introduced to everything else that's out there and having, different influences coming in. Because by that time, we're actually equipped to deal with them. At this point in time, we weren't. And that's why we threw our responsibility out the window and we just, come on, bring on your control because we want your pretty toys. We weren't ready for it. It was like giving a child the decision to do something really serious with their life. You wouldn't do that. So a mistake was made with us that answers the question of why, we don't see someone coming in and just overthrowing it either, because it's like creating the same type of damage in an opposite direction. The savior programming that is within us comes from being saved. It comes from people stepping in and saving us. That's where it comes from. The only way to really get that out of our system is to be able to save ourselves without that. Then we can rewrite that memory, rewrite that tendency within our genetics to follow ourselves and be strong within ourselves instead of looking outside for everything. So a part of us that was manipulated and continues to be manipulated, and now because of fear, we kind of manipulate that within ourselves sometimes. We look and be like, why doesn't, name your brothers and sisters from another star come down and get me out of here, There's reasons for everything. Sometimes those reasons take a really long time to get to. Sometimes things have to go really, really bad for a really long time before they get better. But they always do. Nothing ever stays the same forever. If things get too dark, the natural reaction is for the universe to pull things back the other way. If things get too light, the natural reaction is to throw things the other direction. It does not want stagnancy. So that explains some of the interaction and intervention that we do and don't have. They might contact you because you have a relationship with them, and they might do something to inspire you and help you feel better. But they're not going to do that on a global level because that's not what we need. It's really not what we need. How does play that out in your thought, just in your imagination? Not for you, who has these feelings and knows these things, but for the average person who doesn't. What are we teaching them? What are they learning? We're coddling them, and we're making decisions for them again. And it's a lot of the time our solutions are part of what led us to the problem to begin with, and you have to be careful about that. And that's why I maintain, and I know that it's an outside view of here, that we don't need someone to come down and throw this control system off. We have everything we need to get it off. But whether we choose to do that is on us. And it was a rigged game from the start. The balance for that is occurring. It's just not maybe what people want. I guess most people would hear what the Draco have done and think that the natural reaction would be to punish them. And maybe that would be right. Maybe they deserve some sort of punishment. But how does punishing them really help us? It doesn't. Coming down and just righting all the wrongs that they did, does that really help us either? No, because that also takes our part of the contract out of it that we made long ago. You and I didn't make it, but humans, this species of humans made this long ago. I know people who were there at the point in time of this decision being made. It happened, whether we like it or not. And the other problem with getting into ET interventions are there's always a bigger fish. So imagine, you know, the Draco have done this, and maybe they've washed their hands, but maybe they haven't. Let's say that they haven't. Let's say that they're still paying attention. This is still their baby, and someone else comes over and tries to step in between us and them, and then they have to go to war with them. You got to understand that there's levels of power to that game too, in terms of destruction. Draco are a very powerful enemy. Let's say someone who equals their power comes down to, that ends up destruction for all of us, and well, probably both sides, so that's not going to happen. We see that same thing play out when we start talking about nuclear wars. The same reason they're not going to just start shooting nuclear bombs at each other, because it makes no sense. It kills everything, right? So there's a certain level of that to consider when you're thinking about that type of intervention. And I don't know if males might get this, but you could get in a very consensual, very evenly matched fight in a schoolyard. You could beat the shit out of the kid, and then the next day you have to fight his big brother, right? Or maybe a few days later you fight his big brother. You're walking around feeling good. You won the fight. You're good. Whatever. You you defended yourself. Great. And then all of a sudden, some dude bigger than you jumps you because their bigger brother. You beat up their little brother, right? And so your reaction could be, well, then I'll go get my bigger brother. Right? And then your bigger brother comes and beats up his bigger brother. But then he goes and gets his dad, and it escalates from there. And that's another thing, another concept to consider when we view why interventions like that are not always the best answer, because they can start bigger problems. And that's a lot of, there's a lot of different decisions that we have to go into being made, especially in our particular situation. So that's that. Creatures. People keep asking me about creatures. I don't know names for a lot of them. I just know I saw a lot of shit that looked weird. I was given free access to that facility I talk about that was very similar to the what they showed you in Cabin in the Woods. Bit of a reward for good behavior at a time. So I kind of gravitated towards things that interested me. Water. A lot of different things that live in the water. Things that look like old dinosaurs, like Nessie itself. Other ones that just like, maybe it's similar to an alligator that's just way too big. Various things like that. But a lot of these creatures were included into myths because they were genetic creations that happen over time. Things like Cyclops and the Minotaur and all of those different things. And then there's different versions of that. Like more than one of them were made. They look slightly different, so it's hard to just categorize. Each thing was kind of different, and I think they kept them for diversity. They didn't usually keep more than 2 of anything. When you get into creatures kind of like fairies, and they're more of an elemental spirit than an actual physical creature. They appear very physical when they're in our dimension to us, but they kind of exist in another dimension. Magicians play with that dimension in order to hide things. If you've watched Harry Potter, specifically Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, you can see that idea that magicians can create, it looks like a regular wall, but you walk through it, like the train station in Harry Potter, or just have something overlapping an actual physical space that everyone else can't see. And that's them playing with that extra dimension that's there. I don't know what that would be called in terms of physics, but it's just there, and that's part of learning magic. Involves manipulating that dimension in certain ways, as well as interacting with entities that exist within that dimension. So yeah, a lot of that in terms of learning to see those things or interact with those things comes with your own kind of spiritual evolution. I don't know how to teach people in a broad scale. I could, I need to do work one-on-one with people in order to kind of show them how to fine-tune their perceptions to see these things, because I need to understand what's going on within their emotional responses and thought responses, whatever. But just some typical commonalities is just, looking for energy, being able to see energy radiating off of things like auras. If you've read Celestine Prophecy, where they teach you this trick, like creating a lightning bolt between your fingers and playing with it, those things are tools that you can practice with in order to fine-tune that type of perception. Another thing that I recommend that they actually use on kids in projects, and I think that's where it came from originally, was stereophonic imagery, or those 3D pop-up books that you look at, you move your perception away, and they pop up as a 3D image. Practicing with those really does help you see through dimensions. There's like muscles attached. I'm explaining it to you the way it was explained to me. It's not very scientific, but the muscles in your eyes aren't accustomed to working a certain way that allows you to focus on these things, and that's one way to train your eyes. It's kind of like if you wear glasses like I do, you can start training your vision to get better through discipline of like practicing seeing things further and further away. Like you can, it's a lot about how your organs are connected to your brain and the connections between how strong they are, and you can kind of rewire those through practice, just like muscle memory. So that's probably my best advice, is to go pick up those 3D pop-up books and start practicing with those, because they're really good. Really good way to help you do that. And just in general, like, being a little bit more observant of the way light plays with things, the way light bends, because these different, like, they're light spectrums that you're seeing, right? What we're calling dimensions. It's like a different spectrum of light as well. That would work with your eye. Meditation and visualization and those things help too, because part of the reception comes from your pineal gland or your third eye. And so working on anything that strengthens your third eye also helps you see those things. And in terms of getting them to approach you, if you're overly excited, then they might not. If you have any kind of fear, then they definitely won't. A lot of, like, they're very kind of tuned into things telepathically. Whatever you're putting out, they're getting. So you have to be pretty mastered at controlling, your thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and what you're projecting. The best thing to do would be to be projecting nothing except for just the general frequency of love or respect for your environment. And give it time, because it's kind of like getting a new pet. Sometimes it takes a little while for them to warm up to you. Sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it does. Develop a relationship with anything can kind of take some time. So you can open the dialogue on your end before they open the dialogue on their end, and just speak to them as if they're listening. Pretend that there's already a connection made, and speak to them as if they're friends, and let them know how grateful you are for their presence and whatnot. These things will, they'll get picked up, and it might help them approach you. And a lot of the time, the gift of being able to see them is something that they can give you. So it's another approach to kind of getting there. And then another thing with these creatures is they haven't caught them all. Obviously, there's still lots of Sasquatch out there. There's lots of things that still live in the waters out there. Some creatures that exist within our myths that absolutely exist within reality and they're aware of, but are too big to capture. And then places in the world where they just kind of live. Same is true for giants. There's still places in the world where giants live. But various creatures can hide. Some of them have, ways of doing that. Like, they made a horror movie out of one. They call it Jeepers Creepers. details aren't correct, but the basic premise of it, like sleeps for long periods of time, wakes up for a period of time, and then goes back to sleep for a period of time, makes it a little bit easier for Hyde because even by the time we track it down, it's kind of gone for another X amount of years. So it's another example. Trying to think of something fun, but I don't know. And then you could consider interdimensional beings to be creatures, I guess, as well. They can kind of play with the universe as a whole has a dimension that it all shares that can be traveled through. And that's how they get from place to place. They're traveling through the inner verse rather than the outer verse or the universe. And at times you can interact with them through that same type of portal, and they could appear as different types of creatures or as different types of ETs as well. I don't ever like to say that you should be afraid of anything, but at the same time, don't just assume that everything's nice as soon as you meet it either. Definitely kind of keep your boundaries up, keep your guards up if you're going to start playing with those things, kind of at all times. Yeah. So I keep getting asked about the parents and people wanting me to make a list of them all, and I will absolutely not do that. Pretty sure I've said I won't do that before. I am definitely not going to do that. I've met all of them in some fashion, sometimes just by being in the room with them, maybe not an actual introduction. But there's a few of them that I got to know, 4 of them quite well. People are different. They're different too. They have very distinct personalities, but they're not like us, and they're all changed by their life extension method. Some of them use things like science, like stem cells. Some of them use more energetic things like worship. And then there's the vampires, and then there's all types of different variations of, I guess, those 3 basic ways of collecting energy that can prolong a life. Listing them all out, I kind of can't, won't do. I guess I don't really know what else to say about them because they've become irrelevant at this point, and it would be nothing more than a novelty or a fascination to go too far into anything more about them. So I don't know how to answer that question anymore. Cassandra, who you would become aware of if you read my blog, was one of them, and she was also my handler for a long time. And so that's why I had the relationship with them that I did. My exposure to everything was different than most people's because 2 of my handlers were not human. And both of them represented different versions of that. The first one being one of the parents, the next one being one of the elders, which I talked about in the blog as well, which is a Lumerian. So I can look at them in 2 ways. I can look at them through that personal relationship that I had with them, not knowing the whole time as I was developing that relationship with them what they were and what they represented and exactly what they were accountable for. And then I can view them the way that you all should, knowing what they're accountable for. And so it makes it difficult for me to talk about them because I want to speak from your side of it. But I do have, a personal relationship with them that makes me feel differently about them. I can see, it's kind of like with a person that you see that's like, you may look at their actions and they're terrible actions. They're completely ill-behaved and they're assholes and they lie and they cheat and they do all of these things, but you can, maybe they have an addiction and you can point it to that they're doing all these things in order to achieve their addiction, or maybe they just have a personality disorder and they're doing all of that because of that. Maybe they're just an asshole and they're doing that because of that. But either way, you can make that distinction, right? You can find some type of compassion or at least some level of understanding with them. So that's why I have what I feel about the parents is I spent enough time with them. I got to know their thought process enough that it was like I got close enough to my enemy that I learned what it takes to defeat them. And in that moment, I learned to love them and understand that underneath all of that, they were created for a purpose that they lived out. And case in point, that's a belief I developed a long time ago. And case in point, them kind of proving me right was as soon as they got a chance to get the fuck out of here, they got the fuck out of here. As soon as they had the chance to stop playing that role, they stopped playing that role. Hilarious that a lot of the covenants underneath them didn't, but that just goes to show you the allure of power and the allure of evil sometimes. But that part of a being that gets manipulated to chase the dark like that for some type of prize, it exists within all of us. And I can recognize that. It doesn't matter where I've been, who I've met, whether it gets any light of day, it gets any type of feed from the ego of the being, that part exists in everything. And it does define your character, how you react to that. That's why I say it doesn't matter what happens to the being, it's what the being does once it happens to them. The same thing, what's happening within you. You have a choice of how you react to what's happening within you as well. Some people choose the wrong thing and they go down the wrong path for a very long time. And sometimes they choose to correct. And I can respect someone who chooses to correct at some point in time. The only time I really lose my respect is when they just continue to make the choices that throw them in that direction indefinitely. And they would get my respect back if they did find their way back. So, I had mentioned the elders being Lumerians. After the time of Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu all ended, Muians, they all left or went underground, which we'll come back to later. Most Lumerians left, other than the ones that stayed to go underground. And then the elders decided to still live amongst us. They had reached a point around the time Atlantis had happened that their civilization had, reached their equilibrium, but sat in that spot for too long that they were getting stagnant. And so my personal view of why that whole fiasco with Atlantis happened as it did was the universe's way of giving, the Lumerians a push. And the Lumerians I know view that much the same way, that they had felt like, their world had got to a point where, we're all just kind of hanging out. Nobody's really growing. No, then, it's just nothingness a lot of the time. Something has to change. And they didn't have a major prevalence of evil within their cultures that was able to flare up and cause that. And so it seemed like something came from outside to cause that. And that caused a new cycle in their own evolution. And a lot of my own personal views of what's necessary for a species to evolve and get to their full potential comes from Shane hearing those stories, as well as what I've brought in here with me and seen throughout the universe. That even though these things seem really, really bad at the times that they're happening, and they seem totally wrong and they're completely unfair, that eventually some type of better good comes out of it. The end result of it all ends up being beautiful. That's why I think a lot of the time the caterpillar to butterfly analogy gets used, because the caterpillar goes in, crystallize, it fucking melts into a goo and reformulates all of its parts back into something with wings and completely different than it was, right? And if it wasn't for that goo period, um, it wouldn't be as beautiful as it ends up. So that metamorphosis requires that pressure cooker bad time. And so I personally don't view those, even though you could point to like any particular development within it, those points of time as being bad as a whole. I just see it as a bad time. You're going to have a bad time. And then the outcome of that has the potential to be even better. So a lot of the stories that you hear through the myths, you actually see that as well. Lord of the Rings is a very good example of what I'm talking about in that sense too. And Gandalf has some great quotes on it, so I won't quote Gandalf. So the underground. The component that's most relevant to us, obviously, is the programs and stuff, as my background talks about. Military does their thing as well. And there are fragments of old civilizations that live down there. So there's always a transition between your upbringing and your next step. There's usually different choices. Sometimes species will go out and find another planet that they can build a civilization on and create a home on, and that becomes kind of like their forever home. Some choose to create large craft that they can live within, like a city that they can move in space from various place to place, and they live like that. And the kind of transition for that type of living is usually living in an underground containment, because then you still have that access to some other things in case it's just not working out for you. You can get off, but it's almost like a transition, very similar way of living. So there are still some Lumerians that are living here for that purpose of eventually, after our change of the world happens, they will get the fuck out of here and go do whatever they're going to do next. And that has happened many, 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 many times over history, and some take longer to leave than others. So there's some reptilian groups that do that, or still live on our planet or in our planet. Not Draco. And yeah, just even older groups than that. Some of them would have a city here and then move off planet and then still, maintain that city here and come back and visit it, or their population would be split between the two. So there's a lot of, I've said it before, a lot of different things happening on planet Earth all at once. That is just, and a lot of it just doesn't have anything to do with us, other planets have the same thing going on it, especially like all of the upbringing planets. So yeah, again, it's a pretty broad thing. There's human groups who have learned how to live down there too. Little breakaway civilizations over time, if you will. Groups who had got together, maybe after being in programs and projects, or maybe just without having been picked up by them, who had abilities that we don't all access on a daily basis, that got together in groups and found spots to go and went. Those also exist. But I think the part of the meme within the alternative community that bothers me is just the idea that like this influences us somehow, because it doesn't. It's almost like it might as well be its own dimension. It's just it's something that's going on that's irrelevant to us and separate from us. It's its own development. Mom's got a lot of things going on, a lot of shells in the pies in the oven, I guess. And that's just part of it. And again, we're not the only planet where that's true. So yeah, it runs me through pretty much most of the main topics. I was referencing Lord of the Rings a lot. If you're not familiar, get familiar. You should be familiar. Um, it's a good thing to pick apart. There is a series being made right now by David Whitehead with a woman, Laura Lee something. Sorry, can't remember her last name. I've watched the first two parts. It's great, and I recommend everyone go listen to that. Um, David Whitehead is someone who I personally really appreciate. He used to live in the same city as I do, and he's moved to the other coast of Canada. But I don't listen to a lot of people in the alternative media, so a lot of people ask me who to recommend. I can't, but that's one person I do listen to because I know him like on a more direct level, and he's a really good human being who has, not corrupt and not any of those holds in him. He's just trying to do what we're all trying to do, and he presents or produces a lot of Michael Tessarion's work, who, in my opinion, is probably your best researcher to listen to. A lot of people don't like his personality for whatever reason. Um, maybe don't agree with all his conclusions, and neither do I. But he's not controlled in any type of way. He's not propped up in any type of way. He has a massive amount of protection around him, which is why he's able to get away with being so fucking close to the truth. And all of that is something that you should all look at, because he developed that from a very sovereign place as a natural human being on planet fucking Earth through discipline, through magic, through all learning all of the stuff that he could on his own. He's done what I try to teach other people to do, and I do for myself and think that we all need to do. He's pulled that off, and that's why he's able to connect the dots the way that he does without having to have insiders do it for him, or having to be a member of the Illuminati, or having to be raised within these mystery schools. He is a representation of what everyone's capable of in terms of putting in, like, he put in his 10,000 hours into researching this shit, and he looked at everything and he just brought it in and then processed it instead of like trying to confirm things for himself. He did it the natural way, and the outcome is in my opinion really beautiful. And I've been watching him for a lot of years. I bought his Angels and Angels and Oracles, I think that's what it's called, Origins and Oracles DVDs a long time ago, just to have them to share with other people, because it's one of the best learning tools I've seen. It's another really big question. People are always asking me to give them references for things, and I don't consume a lot of that stuff, so I don't know. But that is one thing I have consumed that I can definitely recommend, and almost insist on you looking into. And so David and Lorelei are doing this series on Lord of the Rings, talking about exactly that, how this is the myth for our times. And she's doing a beautiful job of breaking down a lot of the archetypes and what a lot of these things represents for those of us who couldn't figure it out on our own. And the history that Tolkien is referencing is pre-Lumerian history. It's the history that developed into the Lumerians and Muians, or Lumeria, prior to Atlantis, prior to that split, and prior to Mu being created and men being segregated from that. So there's relevance to it towards our genetic memory, as well as it just being a really brilliantly written mythos for our times. It's it's got everything in there. Maybe I wanted to do something. Lord of the Rings movies are way too long, but Joe Rogan does these things called fight companions, where they watch MMA fights while it's happening, and the viewer can tune in and maybe watch on one screen the fights and then watch on the other screen like these guys talking about the fights and reacting to the fights. I thought something like that might be fun to do with movies, where like I put on Jupiter Ascending and you guys could watch it with me, and I can just be going, okay, that. So I'm considering that. I might try it. But it would be amazing if we all had like endless amounts of time to just do that with Lord of the Rings, because I could do it all day. Um, in, in lieu of that, yeah, definitely check out that series. And yeah. And so the last thing I'm going to touch on is Satan. Satan isn't a being. Satan is not a person. Satan is a thought form. Satan was an idea that Anu created when he created our modern religion. So much sacrifice, so much energy has been put towards that thought form that it manifested as what could be considered an entity, but it's not a person. It's a container that holds all of this energy that all of these Satanists are putting out there. And the Draco just used to feed off of that container of energy. That's what Satan is. The Draco aren't feeding off that energy, so it's doing nothing right now other than being used by Satanists. And so I invite you all to expel that energy, because it has no fucking business here, and recreate something better. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So, also in recommending people, I believe I already mentioned Ben Stewart. Brought up recently because he just did a talk with David Whitehead as well, which I suggest everyone go listen to. He talks about 5G and how it's been implemented in Wuhan. And it goes into what I've been saying about all these technologies that exist all coming together all of a sudden. So he was giving an example of like the Uber system in Wuhan right now being so much so that you can walk outside and just say into the air, Uber, and an Uber will show up, and the Uber reads your face, even with your face mask, reads your entire biometric system to confirm that it's you and that you do not have corona and you're healthy and all those things, and then drives you to where you need to go in a self-driving car. So yeah, if you listen to that, I'm going to talk about it again sometime. I'm going to reach out to Ben to see if he will come on my podcast and talk to me about that, actually, because I liked the way he was laying it out, and I miss the guy and would like to have a conversation with him. If you're not familiar with who he is, he did Esoteric Agenda and Kymatica, another film called Ungrip, and has a sequel to Esoteric Agenda coming out soon. And if you have Gaia TV, you shouldn't cancel your subscription. I'm kidding. If you do and you watch an Esoteric Agenda on there, you will hear a song by me. So that's pretty neat. And that brings me to the end of everything I wanted to talk about. So I'll give you guys a minute if you want to throw any questions in there. I hope everyone's doing all right. I've kind of go through this cycle myself of like have a couple good days. It's been like 3 days up, 3 days doing kind of like a wobble, and then a day where I just fall down, land flat on my fucking face, feel like a big giant piece of ass, and hate life, hate myself, hate everything. So thankfully that's only about a day, and then usually the next day I feel better. But yeah. Okay. I hope. Sorry. Hi everyone. I haven't been looking at the chat, so anything you've said, I'm sorry, I've totally missed it. But now I am. So the question is, what do you think about the Montauk Project Philadelphia experiment? Did they ever send you to the Montauk Island or the Philadelphia? Yeah. Philadelphia was a fun one because my stepdad used to drop me off there and not know why. But I've been to, I guess, both Montauk sites at various times for various programs. Montauk Island one, like the Plum Island one. Is that right? No, probably not. Like with a lot of these places, there's like the above ground version and the underground version. I was familiar with both when it came to Montauk, but I didn't do anything of significance there. It was a lot of like learning things to do with a program that I was in that had to do with them trying to figure out how to train people to walk through walls, how to train people to change the vibration of things that are solid so that they can pass through them either themselves or objects through them. They were doing, I guess they were doing some of the, what would be the experiments to design the technology to do that at Montauk. Um, I think that came from the Manhattan Project as well, but I don't know that for sure just because I never really looked into it. But that's about really all I really know about it. Plum Island's the bioweapons place, yeah. Um, they got those all over the place now, but yeah. Did I miss any other question in between? Backing up the chat, backing up the chat. Oh no, I didn't miss anything. Are we living in the same time parallel as Atlantis when their civilization changed forever? Not sure what you mean by time parallel. I guess sort of. I don't understand astrology and all of that all that well personally because I just not something I've studied. But what I do know about it is that yes, we're kind of there's these a bunch of different cycles. Like some are bigger than others, but we're actually like right at the end of a couple of them, and that's kind of why Nibiru is coming back around as well. I guess it's a couple different cycles. One of them coincided with Atlantis. One of them coincides with Nibiru and the typical nonsense that goes on here. So the answer to that would be yes. Michael Tassarian is the name. Tassarian. I've never talked to him. I don't know him. So he's not paying me either. People are folding like chairs around me. No ability to think for themselves. I feel you there. Been dealing with way too much of that with just people I know. My personal life. Do I do any energy clearing? No, I don't. I don't like to work with people in that type of way. I could teach you different ways to clear your own energy, but I wouldn't do it for you. Yeah, you've had the same ups and downs too, eh? Yeah, it seems to be like I'm hearing it from most of the people I talk to within this community. I just did a podcast yesterday with Emily Moyer from Project or Off Planet Radio. Fuck, that was a bad mistake. Don't want to associate them with them. But yeah, she had brought that up as well, that she's kind of doing the same thing. So I really need to blow my nose. I won't do that while I'm on camera. Do I hate my parents for sending me to those places? No, my parents didn't send me to those places. I don't hate anyone for having to go to those places. I don't regret it. I don't. I wouldn't be who I was. I wouldn't be doing this. I don't think I'd be any happier otherwise either. You know, there was a lot of bad, but there was a lot of good. There was a lot of fun, and there was a lot of pain. Just like anyone else's life, really. Just maybe different extremes or whatever of that. But no, I don't. It wasn't their fault. So, do you have any idea why so many people go missing in national parks? Well, because it's a great way, nice, easy way to make people go missing. Lots of people go missing for lots of different reasons. There's a lot of stuff going on under national parks. That's usually why they designate them as national parks. A lot of them do have large cities under the ground there, or large bases under the ground there. Stadiums, the same thing. Pretty much every stadium I'm aware of has something underneath it. That's like an energy thing with stadiums because all that energy gets, you know, generated in the stadium, and it just filters down into this cauldron underneath. Um, there are some old gods sleeping in some of those that they believe need that energy. That's a podcast for another day. Off-Planet Media, that's the full name. As do I. They are great people, both Randy and Emily. I love them both dearly. Did you do any self-healing at some point from trauma and experiences you've had earlier in life? Yes. It's an ongoing thing. I do it all the time. There's always something I find. I can give you an example. Some of it's kind of weird. A lot of the time I kind of face the fear directly. One thing I was always hanging on to was because of a certain type of, call it torture, conditioning that I went through. I used to have this really big problem with being covered in blood and being covered in bugs. And my band mate had come up with this music video concept that he was going to do with like an actor and or CGI, where he wanted, basically a scene where someone's in a bathtub covered in cockroaches and cuts themselves in the video, starts playing with the blood, covering themselves with the blood. And he wasn't even going to ask me to do it, but when he laid all that out, I heard it all, and I saw that as an opportunity to face a couple traumas that I knew I had. So I volunteered to freely do it, and that video is out there. It's called Broken Spaces. It's actually the lyrics that I wrote in the song premise is about what's happening right now. But the video itself does involve me being covered in blood and being in a bathtub full of cockroaches. So, and also having scorpions kind of crawl in my face and down my shirt and all through my hair. And they were all real, and it was all alive, and none of it was CGI. And I really held a live cockroach in my mouth for a few minutes, and then sang a lyric as it crawled out. So, yeah, that's an example of something that I've done. I bump into things all the time. The most recent thing, I'm just going to be, kind of honest with you guys or open with you guys, is the most recent thing I've had to work through comes from my conditioning from Cassandra, because she was a handler. So there's always conditioning and things like that you have to work through. But specifically with her, she was a female who played on the one weakness I didn't know I had, which was this my heart when it comes to my romantic nature. And it's led to poor management of my relationships with women because of conditioning that happened through her. And so that's the trauma that I've been working on, is various things that she instilled in me that have led me to behave and react the way that I do to romantic partners. Do you think we'll see positive change within our timelines? In brief moments, this transition we're going to see, there's going to be a lot of things that we could consider good. It's just, most of us don't really view it that way because we see it as detaching us from nature a little bit. But, there's going to be more opportunities to heal people, remove people from the slavery system to some extent at least, give people a little bit more creative freedom in terms of art. Things like that. All still controlled and all still at a price, but and then after all of this is done, once this game plays out to its absolute end, the next reiteration of things, the reboot for us, if you will, is going to be fucking beautiful. So yes, I do see a positive change eventually. We're just not there yet. We got some shit to take care of, yo. Where is Og? Og, didn't he just do a live stream test like a few days ago or something? Someone told me about that. I don't know. I hope he's well. Love that boy. Can't listen to him much, but I love him. He's around as far as I know. It was actually just today, actually, I saw him on my YouTube feed, so maybe go check out his channel. What is the best way to clear crystals? Huh. I guess to get everything out of it. What would be the best way to do that? Kind of push empty energy into it, push just pure light into it would probably work, and then pull your own light back out. That would make sense. I don't know, for myself, like I don't use crystals a lot. When I played with them, everything's visual for me, so my visualization was just imagining my light going into the middle and pushing everything out, and leaving it with a clear space. I'm probably not the most educated on the use of crystals to answer that question, but that would be my response. For healing, what do you think of EFT? What do you think of neurofeedback? It can work. I know people it's definitely worked for. So yeah, it's worth trying if you're struggling and you're looking for a little bit of outside assistance with any of those problems. Then yeah, it's definitely worth trying. It may work for you. Like I said, I know people it has worked on. I know people it hasn't worked on. So that's true for really anything, though, right? Like we all kind of react to things differently. So yeah. Can you teach some energy clearing techniques we can utilize? I talked about the hard EMP yesterday. That's one type of thing. In terms of, yeah, clearing, I personally, I kind of go through each chakra itself, keeping in mind what its orient is towards my being. Say like the root chakra is obviously, my roots to the planet. So if I'm clearing that, then a lot of my visualization, a lot of my feeling and emotion, I guess, that I'm putting forth will come organically from the earth. I'll be, visualizing something like tree limbs coming through and, collecting the dirt and then releasing it to the atmosphere to become rain, something like that. Again, I work purely on visualization with these things. It works as well as anything else I've ever heard of. So that would be my suggestion. Deal with each chakra on its own, and then deal with your whole field as a whole after that, and just it kind of like rinse and repeat with shampoo and conditioner. Just keep doing it and keep doing it until every time you do it, you'll feel lighter, you'll feel more energy building, you'll feel better. And people kind of look for a one and done thing with any of this stuff. It doesn't work that way. Everything requires practice, everything requires repetition, everything requires maintenance. And yeah, that's my best advice for that. I'm just a man, I'm not a miracle, anything. Where's the Do the rings from Lord of the Rings actually exist in physicality? Not anymore, but at one point in time, yes, they did. A ring symbolizes a torus field, more or less, right? It's a 3D circle. So the actual ring of power would be the ring of incarnation, right? Wheel of incarnation, ring, wheel. That symbol is just it's a powerful physical form. You can use it for a lot of different things too. Like even when we're talking about energy control, people like orbs. Some people like rings. Rings work too, like bands. What do you call those? Kaleidoscopes. Those things that move like this and have a bunch of different bands. Yeah, whatever works for you, it is valid. Whether it's a sphere or a ring or a bunch of rings that create a sphere, like in the movie Contact, that machine, right? Ultimately, what's going on when we're seeing spheres is something more akin to that's happening so fast that it just creates a circle, right? Just like in that Contact movie. Man, it's been a long time since I saw that movie. I should watch it again. Anywho, I think that answers the question. I use color puncture for healing subconscious programming trauma. It is pretty incredible for me and folks I've worked with for removing triggers, programming, and so on. Yes, I've know a lot of people I know from my intended audience have experimented and had good work with that too. Sound therapy works really well as well. And then if you want to get into something chemically based, MDMA therapy, magic mushroom, psilocybin, if you had someone to, if you go into it with that intention. What would be a good approach to help speed heal broken bones? Well, everything, again, back to the visualization. Generate the energy, like before, and I know you were here for this, hi. Like before when I was talking about condensing it into the heart chakra, you can do the same thing in different parts of your body to promote healing. I'm not a healer, so I'm not the best person to answer this question. Again, but this is, would be my way of describing it would be just focus that energy into where the injury is, the bone itself. And then visualize, you can kind of talk to the cells and instruct them what to do. Bruce Lipton's work gets into that a bit. Your own belief is a big deal there, right? And therefore what you're visualizing, what you're believing, that's where the whole magic, right? Imagination, will, and then the conviction and faith to follow through on it. So yeah, that would, same principles, just generate that energy, get it all nice and flowing, get that big reserve of it, give it towards that, start talking to the cells, start setting the intentions, visualizing it being stronger. And then after that exercise, building up bone density through exercise is a something that we don't do enough of. We need to. Humans just don't get enough exercise. This body was built to get a lot more than it does, and our lifestyles just don't allow for the amount that it should get. So we have to supplement that by working out. Don't just do it to grow muscles. You don't have to look at it like that. You can just do it to maintain healthy bones, get lots of sunlight, and yeah, picturing an overall, optimized picture of health in your mind is always good. Don't tell yourself, "Oh, this is going to make me sick." The placebo effect works in reverse. So there you go. Do you think Joe Rogan is protected? Yeah, he brings it. I don't know if you listened to the podcast I did with Pat Miletich. Pat knows him personally. There was some mention. Yeah, I mean, it's clear to me what he's doing. I think it's, he allows people to bring them up, but then he's also really quick to dismiss them. And when he can't dismiss them, he changes the subject. There's a recent podcast he did with Tim Dillon just after the coronavirus lockdown that is a great example of his tactics in that regard. And if you watch that one and then any other time a conspiracy theory comes up, he'll entertain it to an extent, but then he'll pull those same tactics to shut it down. Guarantee you someone taught him those tactics and how to shut it down, and he probably has a pretty good list in his mind of what he can allow and what he can't. And the kind of saving grace or the out that he always has is, I was joking, right? Because he's a comedian and there's a lot of jokes that go on in his program. So he's always got that little bit of it out, but yeah, not protected, controlled. I like him. I listen to his show all the time, so I'm not putting that down. But definitely, there's a line there that he knows better than to cross. I would like to hear more about Source one day, on a day with less questions. People are on a roll today. I can do that. I'll keep that in mind. What's the origin of shungite? I don't know. Kale is good for bones. Kale is good in general. Yes, it is all about believing in your own potential. It seems like I'm giving people the same answer to a lot of questions and making it seem so simple, but it's because it is. And the ones that are trying to overcomplicate it back to you, they're feeding that thing intentionally or not, that makes you look or makes you feel weaker than you are, makes you question whether or not you're worthy or capable of these things. And that's why I try to keep it as simple as possible. And even though it can be a little bit more complicated than I am stating it, um, I want you to explore your own power. And if I keep it simple for you, and I keep insisting that you try these things anyways, you're going to find your own way. And there's lots of guides out here, of which I am one, to help you as you're finding your way. But um, you know, you all have the potential. If you're all incredibly powerful, and you don't need me or anyone else to do these things for you. And I'm just here to remind you, I'm not teaching you anything. If I'm initiated into Freemason, what are the long-term effects? And it depends on how deep you go. You have to get really, really, really deep before it matters. And to be honest, with the way the structure is today, I don't know if you'd ever get that deep again. Um, a lot of those, fraternities and cults and stuff are going to be kind of obsolete with this new world anyways, changed by new ones. Second degree, you've got, that's... Conspiracy theorists like to say that the 32 and 33 degree are the highest, and then some insiders have said, no, it's actually 42 and 43, and then there's some other ones who've bumped that all the way up to 99, and it might be higher than that. So at those lower levels, it's actually not that bad. You can consider it bad because it's feeding a system that at its top is a bad one. But for those lower levels, I mean, you're helping the community, and you're bringing information to the community. You're not doing things that are all that bad, really. And you get to meet some like-minded people within your community that you could become friends with. I mean, there's not a lot of downside to the lower levels, to be honest. Just don't chase the dangling carrot, right? All movies have okay, so the question, sorry, I shouldn't do this. Do you think movies like Hunger Games have subconscious programming? Yes, they do. There was a bunch of movies around the same time that came out, like The Maze, Snowpiercer, a bunch of them. They were all showing you kind of transitionary world between here and now, and we're kind of almost seeing that kind of playing out in a lesser extent without anything quite as terrible. But the basic seeds were planted even with the idea of Hunger Games for what's going to come next, in terms of they're going to have to recreate jobs. They're going to have to start designating people in different ways than they used to, retraining people. And that feeds into a society type that starts raising people into certain roles and into certain jobs and into certain things, which is not too different than we are now, but that would be a little bit more of a controlled version. So the reason for that particular movie having that particular subconscious programming is because it's kind of coming. We're seeing it. That's why they just created all these new categories so they could start filling them. It falls under a topic that I'll probably do another day too. But there you go. Shane from hello, Shane from Finland. We want to know about Mudflood and Tartaria. Program or real thing? I'm not sure what you're referencing with those names. They sound familiar. Tartaria is not that Russian. I'm sorry. Maybe email me with that, and maybe like something so that I know what you're asking me about directly, because Mudflood has multiple meanings to me, and so does the other word. So I'm not really sure what you're asking me. I'm sorry. This might be something that's going around in the alternative community I haven't read about, so. If we have more free will choice in realms above the physical, how can we act more consciously in those realms so positive changes will trickle down to the physical? Well, you asking that question is one way. Living your life in accordance with what you would like to see is the way that you would send that message, but it actually just works the other way. What's going on up there is a lot more knowledgeable than where you are right here. So even if you felt like you wanted to tell yourself up there something, it wouldn't be something that you didn't already know up there. So in order to make things kind of manifest down here more in line with how you're feeling them here, that would just be by living out, using your own magic while you're here to influence, and also living out in your own way that change you want to see, as they say. Be the change you want to see. Hold that frequency you would like things to move to. That would be the best answer for that question. But again, most of the choices are happening up there and trickling down here, and what's making that choice up there is well aware of what's going on down here as well. Hyperborean continent. Don't know what that means, I'm sorry. Do you know why they use elephants for programming? Not exactly. I mean, there's the elephant in the room thing, which comes from showing how, like, it was a public display of hypnosis, right? So I think it's probably, we have certain animals that are like almost like totems attached to our psyche when it comes to certain topics. Elephants are definitely one of them. That's why they're in all of the primitive art, even in cultures that never would have seen an elephant. I believe what it represents is memory, if I'm correct in that. And so, yeah, the programming happens in the memory. So I guess that would make sense. I don't know. I'm not familiar with elephants being used for programming personally. I can't remember that, but it would make sense in terms of its totem representation to what it means to humans that they would use that. Yeah, yeah. I think that answers the question. When I was watching myself the other day, these were the most awkward moments, were the ones where I'm like reading the chat. I look so strange to myself. And any safe way to interrupt someone else's programming that you know of, that you know is MK? Safe? Well, I mean, it's never safe. There's a break that happens with it. So I guess the only safe way is to understand that that break will happen and to be able to be strong enough to walk them through it and be there with them. So, you know, if it's an online friend and you can't be there with them in person, don't trigger something like that because they need someone in the fucking room with them. But if it's like, you know, a person that you know in real life, so to speak, that you can sit down with, if you have a way of interrupting the programming. If you're asking me for ways to interrupt someone's programming, huh. Give them LSD. That'll do it. It's LSD is used for programming a lot. Derivatives of LSD are used for programming a lot, and it's like the typical rewriting method of repeating an action in a different environment under a different intention with different parameters in order to rewrite the memory in the brain. That's why taking LSD could work. I heard many stories of
people who wanted out, and the way when they were allowed out, the way that they were given their out was, here, take this, and they were handed an envelope with LSD in it. So that's one way MDMA works as well. And then, if for a more natural way, so hard because they have to participate, and depending on how heavily controlled they are, they may not want to participate. But I mean, you could use meditation, visualization, breathing techniques, something like, maybe Wim Hof's method or Kundalini fire yoga or something like that could work as well. Basically, what you're doing in all cases is reprogramming. You're never going to heal the wound, but you can rewrite why you have it. I think that's my best answer for your question. It's probably not a great one, but I tried my best. Was Hyperborea an actual continent in the ancient past? There were more names. I can't say no because I don't know that name as being one of them, personally. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't called that, or that's not the name for it. There have been more than one sunken continent on this planet, and continents have been rearranged a few different times through different earth changes. So yes, there's the two, Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. There's a continent at the bottom of both of them. There's a big part of Antarctica that's underwater as well. So there's been lots of sinking, lots of rearranging, lots of changes over a very, very long time. This is a question about Freemasonry. So taking the oath doesn't have any spiritual implications. Yes, it does. But again, your intentions are what matter, right? It's not your oaths change. I don't know how much this has been explained to you, but the higher up you go, your oath, you keep making new oaths as well, and they change. So pay attention to what you're saying. Pay attention to the spelling, because that's how spells are cast and that's how contracts are made. Pay attention to the wording, and if it feels like something you don't feel right saying, don't say it and get out. But again, at those lower levels, you're pretty safe, man. Ask yourself truly what your intention in being there is. If you think you're going to change things from the inside, you're not. And if that's your reason, get out now. If you think that you can, from those lower levels, help your community, and that's your intention and that's your desire, you're right. You can do that. Go ahead and do that, and try not to worry too much. But yeah, just trust yourself to read the signs as you're walking through. Maybe I'm the wrong person to say this because I fucking would eat dinner with, Satan if he was a real dude. But yeah, it's just watch your step. Put it that way. You've got a long way to go before you're in any kind of real danger. Is it possible to be involved in projects and have no memory at all? Yes. Or just little bits and pieces of memory. As your conditioning would, if that were true for you, as your conditioning started to break, that's when your memory would start to come back, especially if you've been abandoned from a program, as most people are, because most of those programs have closed. And then from there, it becomes a question on whether or not you need to actually deal with it. How much is it affecting your life is always a question I will ask someone, as to whether or not they need to retrieve full memory. If it's affecting your life, then you need to retrieve the memory. If it's not, then you're only retrieving the memory for fun, and it might do more damage than good. So yeah, that answers that question. Yes, it is very possible for people to have absolutely no memory of it, or just bits and pieces that they question, and that's why they listen to people like me talk, because They might have one little memory of something that made them think maybe I'm part of it, but I don't know for sure. And yeah. Do you know why certain people are brought into projects? Is it all genetics? No, it's not all genetics. A lot of it, especially in more modern days, has to do with soul frequencies, because they started being able to measure that. Anytime they found something unique, they would want to bring in that soul in order to experiment with it. Different energy signatures, soul signatures as it is, interested them. So it became more about that than genetics. Earlier days, yes, genetics were a big deal, but they lost control of that a long time ago. I read somewhere that Jesus was actually, I don't like to say that name. What's your opinion on that? There are so many different versions. No. No. I guess there's certain characteristics that could make that true, but it would have to be both of those sons in order for that. He's kind of a parody of both of them, not one or the other. And his counterpart, the one I mentioned earlier, Satan, would be a combination of them both as well, in the way that his character is represented. But when Anu wrote that book, Jesus was he used Jesus because he was perverting someone who was here during that particular point in time who did things. So he used that singular image. Otherwise, yes, he would have used his two sons in parallel. Instead, he kind of took what he would have used his two sons for and condensed them down into that one character in order to change some of that character. A lot of it still is there, but yeah, so the answer is no, it's not one, it's actually both of them, and neither of them all at the same time. As confusing as that was. Mud flood, is that one of the names of like the deluge or reset? One of those things? When is that going to happen? Who knows? I thought what was going to happen, right? What is happening right now wouldn't happen for another 4 years. Timing is relative to reactions to things, so. My fragments of 1950s MK Ultra memory are mostly psi experiments. Yeah, that would make sense. That makes sense. Even in my generation, which started in the 80s, we were still mostly psi stuff and mostly the magic side or organic technology side of things. But we were transitioning into the technology side of things. And that's why a lot of the projects aren't so necessary anymore, because they perfected all those technologies, and all those technologies are about to become public. So unnecessary. Why do we have such a large subconscious? It is said it rules 90% of our lives. Because we're not very good at making things conscious yet. I don't really know how to answer that directly. A lot of that has to do with, the brainwashing, the general mind control that we're under. It's not that we, our subconscious are subconscious because we're not paying attention to it, right? And the more you bring things out of your subconscious, they're now conscious, right? So the reason why 90% of our mind is subconscious to us is because we're not fucking paying attention to it. That's the most simple answer for you. Hi, Dave, man. Thank you for that. I have relatives in Lachine and in Montreal. A good friend in Montreal I would love to go visit. I was actually going to go there this summer. I don't know if I'm going to be allowed to do that with this whole lockdown shit going on. It's worse there for you guys than it is for here, than in Ontario, from what I hear. But thank you very much, Dave, man. And if I ever do start getting myself ready to move that way, maybe during our little lull in lockdown that we'll get over the summer, I will let you know. If they see you have talent as a musician, actor, businessman, person, will they bring you into the projects later in life just to exert control? Sometimes, especially if you develop a lot of influence on your own, they'll dangle carrots in front of you, and most people will give in to those carrots, or not. But they will do that in order to bring you in. Yes, that's normal. If they don't catch you when you're young and you grow into your craft and they notice it then yes, they will. Or if you develop something that they could see useful, they will do that as well. So who can help people from projects when they need psychological spiritual help? Somehow I don't envision mainstream psychologists being useful here. They can be. They can be. A traditional psychotherapist. I've used one. I recommend them to the intended audience of my blog. Because there's certain universal truths to psychology that come through in psychoanalysis anyways. Anything that they're missing or they don't understand, you can learn from this community and apply it to the lessons they're teaching you. So yeah, it would be kind of like taking two different martial arts, and in karate they teach you to punch like this, and in boxing they teach you to punch like that, and you learn to punch like that, right? So a combination of the two. That's my best analogy for you. It can definitely help. I do recommend it. Because a lot of what you're doing, like, you're going to have to do a lot of the deprogramming and reprogramming for yourself ultimately anyways, right? And the best way to do that is to learn how psychology works, and you'll learn psychology through being psychoanalyzed. So it's a good way to do it. I kind of thought 2020 was supposed to be subconscious, so it will be in hindsight. Will be in hindsight. Hindsight's 2020. That's the saying. A podcast with Michael Desarian, David Whitehead, and Mark Passio. I like Mark as well. I've never spoken to him or reached out to him at all. Someone told me once that he was aware of my blog, but I don't know how true that is. Michael Desarian probably wouldn't bother because I talk about a bunch of stuff that he doesn't pay attention to, which is good because he does a better job of paying attention to what he does pay attention to. But I might. I'm definitely going to reach out to David kind of soon, and maybe he'll test the water with him as to whether or not I could get in touch with Michael. I'm pretty sure Michael doesn't like to do a lot outside of his own productions with David, which is understandable. I mean, I don't either, so I get it. But if I can make that happen, I will. So in the little lull in lockdown this summer, going to be used against the people. Virus will come back for round 2 and be blamed on the relaxed restrictions. Yes, I think that's exactly what they're going to try and play. And my best advice for that is exactly what I want you to hear Ben Stewart say, which is prepare for that. Get ready for that. Come September, October, November, we could end up right back in this, and make sure you have the tools at home to utilize that time well, because that one will probably be a much longer one. So I would say 2 things: enjoy the fucking summer if we get out, right? Like, enjoy the time that we're out, but also prepare for what's to come, in terms of making sure that because that might be where we start to see the food shortages and stuff like that. So any way that you felt ill prepared for this, make sure you're prepared for that. It's the best advice I've heard anyone give, and I'm stealing it from Ben Stewart. So thank you, Ben. We all thank you. Have you ever been surprised by someone in your memory of the projects of people that were there, like public figures you didn't know were involved. Every once in a while, I see someone come out in the public that I'm like, oh, I remember you. I think that answers that question. I don't, like, most of my memories are still, like, I never really lost them. They've always been pretty conscious for me. So uh, it's always been that. Like, there's world leaders that I've spent time with, um, politicians, lawyers, doctors, people you see on the news, all kinds of different stuff, musicians, actors, all of it. But most of them are still playing for that side, so I'm not a big fan of them personally. And I think that's all the questions. And I really need to urinate, and it's almost been 2 hours. So I think I'm going to wrap it up for tonight. Thanks, guys. If you guys want to send me more questions, feel free to. I'll do another round of this in a little while. I haven't quite decided what my next one will be, but I will do it again next Thursday. I have 3 podcasts to edit, get off my lazy ass and get those put up, and a couple more to record this week. In the meantime, everybody have fun, okay? Try and, do your best. Remember that, your energy matters, your imagination matters so much, They've done everything in their power to break that down. Let's make that one the next one. Let's do the next one where I just talk about imagination and all the ways that they've beat that out of you and all the ways that you can bring it back. How about that? That's useful, right? So let it be said, so let it be done. All right, guys. Much love to you all. Much respect to you all. Take care of you for us. And I will see you next time. Bye.